Widow's Perch marks the end of the Serpent's Ditch, a grueling path Jack had been traveling on for quite some time now. Nearly at a week of trekking in harsh conditions accompanied with battling the countless vile mutants of the waste had left him drained and in need of refuge from the ditch's onslaught. If at least for a night. A small glance at his only firearms reserves confirmed his suspicion that he couldn't afford to get into much more trouble. Proper munitions were scarce in this wasteland, and he knew the only way he could afford them was by force regardless. Wiping the broadside of his bloodied blade on the tail of his coat, he sheathed it upon his hip and pressed on into the gloomy town, entering into a nearby saloon aside the muddy path. Pushing the double doors inward, the first thing that fell upon his senses was a discount old-timey tune he'd heard from one of the western movies of his youth, which came to him as the only inviting thing he'd met so far on his journey. The bar was relatively clean, and the tables tended to, a sign that whomever ran the place at least cared about it. Minding to step over the various bottles poured near the entrance by some rumpled drunk sleeping in the corner, he met the gaze of the barkeep as he stopped by the nearest stool, shooting a short glance to a gridded pair discussing town affairs at a nearby table. Standing tall and sturdy behind the mahogany bar top was the presumed owner of the place, polishing a mug with a rag as he hummed quietly to the chirpy piano tunes in the air, though he took pause to address his newest patron suddenly adjacent.
What brings you in such an hour, friend?
I'd like a room and a spit of rye, if you carry it.
Nodding, the bartender set down his task and started the order, fetching up a bottle of whiskey and a shot glass as he took to driving a conversation.
Not many folks come around to these parts, much less at this time of night.
Probably because this gulch swallows them up before they make it this far.
Aye, more than likely. That makes you the tough sort, eh?
I suppose. But I'm not here on a joyful hike, after all.
Nobody is if they're in this deep. You're looking for something, clearly. Or someone.
The barkeep slid the shot across the counter to him, Jack glancing at it from folded arms as he began to dig in his sleeve for his coin.
I am, and I was wondering if you could help with that.
Well, it depends on what you're looking for. The room will be 1 argan, by the way. No charges for any spirits in this town.
Jack's hand placed itself upon the bar and slid across 3 coins beneath it, his visage intently staring at the barkeep.
I'm looking for the Golden Cheshire.
The bartender and all the music and soft conversation that Jack had been listening to suddenly froze, leaving nothing but silence in the air. Gathering his thoughts together, the keep cleared his throat, and returned to cleaning the mug from before in contemplation as he responded, giving the pianist an eye so that they'd continue.
That's quite an ambition. A foolish one, but one nonetheless. Shouldn't have to mention that you're asking for a grave amidst the coal veins, huh?
Do you know where they are?
Suppose I've heard a thing or two from the odd gossip around here. Getting there isn't really so much of a concern as is the creature itself.
I'm more than aware. I merely need the direction.
More than direction you'll need, outlaw.
Jack looked aside to the 2 seated at his left, where the voice spoke out, locking eyes with the gruffer of the duo.
It ain't about finding 'em. It's about pleasing 'em.
They continued.
You won't get nothing but a dead heat going down there without a clue, boy.
And I suppose you'd be willing to share the tidbits I'm missing?
The man snorted, brushing the side of his nose with the broad of his glove as he half chuckled his response.
Sure, but if you want to know its price, you gotta pay mine.
Jack's gaze narrowed to the proposition, knowing it was going to be one he'd have to begrudgingly adhere to.
That being...
How about that shiny piece on your hip? You ain't gonna need it that far down anyway, considering you won't be making it back.
Placing his hand upon his revolver in question, Jack had half a notion to draw it and drop the smug vagrant at his table, but he knew he'd have to expend 2 bullets for that.
Concluding his cost-effective analysis, he took the gun off its holster, half-cocking its safety as he proceeded to toss it onto the table the two sat at. Picking up in a sooted hand and hardly looking over it, the man grew a dirty smirk, content with his oh-so-clever bargaining.
Yeah, it'll do. If you want anything from the Golden Cheshire, go and eat a few trinkets. He'll only do business with a fellow toting round a piece of gold, a sturdy pick helve, and a whole bottle of hooch.
Now Jack had heard that there were some catches to the Golden Cheshire's deal, but he wasn't aware of there needing to be more than a moral price to pay for it. Fortunately, from all the time he'd spent in the canyon, he actually had everything mentioned save for the alcohol. The barkeep must have been able to deduce that himself from how he noticed Jack glance back to him, nodding his head once as he turned to the cabinet below the counter.
Pulling up the entire container of whiskey his shot had been poured from, he firmly set it in front of Jack, and gestured to the 3 coins previously laid with a tapping finger.
Say we just tie this in with what you've paid up. Maybe you'll get some use out of it if the old devil doesn't.
Giving his genuine thanks with a nod, he took the bottle and placed it into his travel sack, standing from his bar stool after polishing off his drink.
And where should I start my search for the demon in question?
From what I've gleaned, you're going to be going into the depths of the Castell mines. They're a bit north here, near the end of the trail. Long abandoned, of course, so it'll be hard to tell if the devil is the only thing you'll be seeing here.
I wouldn't dream of having a doubt.
Suppose you should go ahead and catch up on some rest. Room's up and 3rd down.
Thanks.
The sudden, acute noise of a board squeaking by his room made him come awake. He glanced towards the door from his pillow, listening for anything else to follow the first sound. Only a brief moment had to pass before the same creak came once more outside, this time slightly paced ahead as if someone was creeping by his quarters. Instinctually, Jack made a reach for his revolver, but gripping hollow leather reminded him of his prior exchange. Not wanting to be caught in a jagged spot, Jack quietly rose from his mattress and placed a hand on the windowsill, waiting for the noise to occur once more. As it predictably came, he opened the window up swiftly for a bit with 2 fingers, using the creaking as a cover. Then twice more they occurred, seemingly doubling as he heard the steps firmly place themselves directly in front of his door, shadows leaking in from underneath it due to the dim lights from the main room. Having made a large enough opening, Jack silently maneuvered himself outside, being sure to close it behind himself as he went and hung from the corner frame. As he did, he heard his room open. Rather than stick around to perhaps hear confusion or listen to a plan of sorts, his own plans took priority, and he had gained the rest he needed, though as little as it was. Dropping down quietly onto a lifted barrel and then off onto the soft ground behind the saloon, Jack made swift steps north into the town, using the lined buildings as his dark cover as he went. His destination was set in stone, but if his pursuers valued his bounty more than their lives, he knew that they may know it as well. Castell Mines had been one of the many examples that happened in the world when Argon resources dried up, forcing the populace to try and seek an alternative precious mineral for their finery workings and trades. Of course, when one couldn't be found, societies turned to the extremes and defined the wasteland to be what it is currently. The only ones who'd find ways to prosper would be the strong, the brave, and the immoral. Jack hadn't come here in search of riches or nobility. He knew such things would only make him more of a target than he already was. Arriving at the decrepit entrance to the ruins of the mines, he fished out his lighter from his pocket, holding it up and igniting it as he teetered it against the interior of the mine shaft. The flame brightened swiftly, then more so the further he moved it inward. As he had expected, though the mine was more than deprived of argon, such wasn't the case for its deep coal spots, along with the silent killer that seeped from them. Unpacking a filter mask and a covered lamp from his bag, he used his lighter to ignite his light source while he secured the face guard to his jaw. A hand tightly grasped the handle of his blade as he proceeded with only the utmost caution down into the dark depths.
Though the twists and turns of the deep tunnels led many more astray, Jack was equipped to handle the engulfing abyss of shadow that hung around him. With his covered flame, he made his way following along signs that pointed towards more active paths than others, be it spare pieces of scrap from those who tried to get below, or ancient cart tracks being just ever so slightly cleaner than branching ones. Though one thing in particular was guiding him well, that being the distant, echoing knock of metal on stone, as if an ancient miner was still at work within. Descending on an old pulley platform at the end of a curve, Jack had arrived at the heart of the mine's lowest point, and it was here the clanging noises that had lured him in were at their loudest. The ringing reverberations off of the circular stone walls around him nearly ended up shaking him to his very core as he advanced towards their source, seeing a wooden frame that had partially came down around the mouth of a much larger tunnel. The buckling of the wooden arches had made it so that the inner parts of the tunnel were much darker than its exterior, though judging by the volume of the mining now, he presumed he hadn't needed to go any further. Glancing downward, he noticed that before the maw of this burrow was a rectangular wooden table, one that had seen relative age much like the area itself, but still rather intact. Holding his lantern up to the black veil in front of himself, he called out into it, still gripping his weapon tight with ill expectations.
Are you the Golden Cheshire?
A final blow of metal against stone rang out from the tunnel, before several more noises followed, a heavy object being placed out into the dirt, a deep, incoherent mumbling, and large, heavy footsteps trotting closer to the archway. As the steps stopped before the fire's reach, nothing was visible in the glow of Jack's lantern, save for what only could be called a sickly, inhuman grin that greeted him, a single golden tooth reflecting in the illumination amidst the rest.
A lowly bounty hunter come to my humble home. Or perhaps a wanderer that got you curious.
I'm not here to waste time, Cheshire. I'm here because I happen to know you specialize in things no mortal may make.
To hearing it was a business transaction to be had, the Cheshire hissed out a warped giggle from his crooked and decayed jaw.
Oh, so you seek a transaction. Very well. Do you believe you can pay the price?
Jack made sure to lock his eyes on the Cheshire, feeling the beast sizing him up every second he stood in front of him. As he kept this stare, he sat down the lamp beside his feet, not wanting to remove his hand from his only weapon as he fished about in his sack for the items in question. Producing forward the rumored objects, he sat them steadily and slowly down upon the small table, making sure to distance himself a bit back from it and take up his lantern once more afterwards. The Cheshire seemed to release a deep, growling noise of what could be assumed to be approval or hunger, the grin lowering as two large, gnarled hands extended outward from the murky black shade and gripped the sides of the small table, pulling it back out of sight. After a short examination by the demon, it seemed content, much to the relief of Jack that he hadn't been entirely scammed for this trade.
This will do. Nicely. Very well. What is it that you seek?
I want a reliable weapon for once. A gun that I never have to worry about reloading or scrounging up rounds for. I want to pull the trigger, and it to always fire a bullet.
Really? A mere gun? You don't want land? Or perhaps wealth?
Yeah, exactly what I asked for. With a weapon I can count on, I can take wealth or land for myself. It's all I need.
There was a stillness, as if the Cheshire was considering if it would grant him this. Jack's hand began to shake ever so slightly from how firmly he was gripping his blade. But the full unhinging smile of the monster returned, as it had seemed to have made up its mind.
Yes. A gun you desire. Then a gun you shall have.
One of the wretched hands returned into the lantern's glow, sliding forward the table it previously took
back into sight. Lying on it was a strange, large revolver that seemed as if it was entirely plated in gold, odd symbols lining its barrel and cylinder.
But remember,
The Cheshire warned.
everything has its depth.
Removing his hand from his blade to take up the revolver instead, he looked it over in front of himself, finding its weight and design impressive, and certainly inhumane by craft.
I'm aware. But some debts
His thumb pressed on the hammer, clicking it back all the way as he took an aim upward.
can't be paid.